So this is different, huh? The light from the microphone is just on my face. I'm here, you're here, our pumpkin friends are here as well, and we're just going to be talking about a couple topics that interest me in the Ohio sports landscape. Just a couple, though, not too much. I'll probably be at the normal angle, directly on you, back in a different part of the room when I'm doing game recaps, but just for this, we're going to be having a nice little chat by the fire here, the totally natural and totally definitely not artificial fire here. So we have the Deshaun Watson injury, where the timeline is, it's still unknown as ever, with Deshaun Watson speaking to the media on Wednesday. He revealed that he had a strain in his rotator cuff. There are some micro tears that are involved possibly. He said himself he's not going to be sure when he'll be fully ready to play. He said it's all up to the medical staff. It could be this week, could be tomorrow, could be in 2 weeks, might be a Christmas present. Maybe on Thanksgiving Day he'll have a nice full hearty meal and decide he's good to go. But I do think there was a step in a positive direction today on the injury front, with Amari Cooper before practice saying that he expects Deshaun Watson to participate in the practice activities today. And he must be some kind of a Cleveland Browns football prophet, because he was right. Deshaun Watson did participate. He was out there. He was making throws. I believe he's still listed as questionable, so it's still very much up in the air as to whether or not he'll actually play against the Indianapolis Colts. There was a lot made about him being medically cleared and still not playing. A lot of questions about, like, hey, is Deshaun Watson, is he is he intentionally sitting out of these games? Medically cleared, that phrase does not necessarily mean that someone should play a game of football. Baker Mayfield a couple of years ago, he was medically cleared for all of the games he played in, that he clearly was not in 100% game shape to go, and probably hindered that season, definitely ruined a lot of his image as a quarterback that that he might be regaining in with Tampa Bay. Time will tell as the season rolls on. So could Deshaun Watson have played the last 2 games? Probably he could have. If he was medically clear, they could have put him on the active list and thrown him out there. But would Deshaun Watson have been any good? Would they have magically put up 20 some more points against the Ravens and won that game? Would it have been beneficial to the season long term? I don't think so, personally. Again, what the issue with Baker Mayfield was not necessarily his willingness to play. I always admired that with Baker Mayfield in that season, but it was just clearly that his injuries were definitely holding him back, and by proxy holding the Browns back when he was in at quarterback. So I don't want an injury that might take 3 or 4 weeks to heal for them to keep throwing him out there, and it just becomes this issue that keeps popping up over and over throughout an entire season. And what I saw about rotator cuff injuries, especially when it's strained, the recovery time does seem to vary. And what we saw against San Francisco does make me personally feel a lot better about the possibility of Deshaun Watson not playing against Indianapolis. With the defense, like we saw, if they can beat the 49ers without PJ Walker, they could also beat the Colts. You'd argue with the way the 49ers are playing. If you beat them like that, you could win against any team in the NFL with that kind of defense and just enough offense. However, just with the defense making every game winnable, each game that Watson does miss becomes all that more losable as well. Like Indianapolis, even with Gardner Minshew in there, if you go into a game taking your opponent lightly, they're still an NFL team. They're going to make you pay for it. But seeing Deshaun Watson actually start to throw at practice does lend some credibility to the idea that there is some light at the end of the tunnel as far as him being cleared to play and being fully healthy. Whether or not he's the quarterback that they paid the contract they gave him for, and just the PR headache that they knew they were inheriting, if that was all worth it, jury's still out on that. We did get a good game against Tennessee, but at this point in the season, still a question mark, even with a few games under the season. But again, if he can't go, the Browns, again, they beat the 49ers with PJ Walker, so it is very possible that they will be able to beat the Colts with PJ Walker in there as well. You also have the Blue Jackets. They've played in 3 games so far. They have a 3-day break. This is the last day they play again tomorrow, Friday, against Calgary. 2 of those games have been really, really bad. The team really hasn't been able to come back from any sort of adversity in the 2 games that they lost. They were down by 1 goal headed into the first intermission. I actually thought in the first period against both Philadelphia and Detroit, the games that they lost in, they did have some things they could build off of to make a nice foundation. But, man, they really just did not follow that up. It just led to some uninspired hockey in the final 40 minutes of both of those both of those games. With the Rangers, they were up by 1 after the first period. That definitely seemed to build the momentum in the second period, and the third period was all Rangers. So even in the game that they won, they were completely dominated in at least 20 minutes of hockey there. Pascal Vincent, look, he knows he's going to have to turn around some bad habits that this team might have learned under Brad Larson, and I do like some of the moves that he's made in order to hold some players accountable, like benching the shiny new toy in Damon Severson because he had just a terrible turnover and didn't look good in that game against Detroit. That's a good coaching move to hold him accountable. He knows he has to play better. He said as much after that game. You have Eric Robinson going on waivers after he seemed like he was one of the favorite bottom 6 wingers of the front office, getting him on waivers, and he cleared because why would anybody want a fourth liner to guarantee him an NHL spot on the roster? Why would anybody want that for a fourth liner on what was the second worst team in hockey last season? Good for the Jackets for knowing that they could put him on waivers and clear him. You have Jack Roslovic and Emil Bemstrom. They've still been skating with the main lineup in practices. I'm really hoping that's like motivated as some kind of trade bait move to try to get another front office to take a flyer on them for maybe like a mid or late round pick or like a middling prospect or something. I do feel like while there might be some hope with Emil Bemstrom, Jack Roslovic carrying a cap hit of $4 million and the production or lack thereof he's giving on the ice is just an anchor on this team right now. Something I've been less and less of a fan of as the young season has gone on for the first 3 games is this idea that Pascal Vincent has of this like this philosophy of having positionless forwards, where it's like, yeah, there's 3 forwards, and the only thing the center really does is take faceoffs, and besides that, it's just kind of it's more of a positionless thing. There's 3 forwards out there, one of them happens to take faceoffs, and that's the center. That has been one of the reasons why some people in the fan base weren't all that worried about the Patrick Laine at center experiment and how that's resulted in order for Adam Fantilli to be on the line with Patrick Laine, Fantilli's been moved to the wing to play with Patty, and that's like, oh, well, it's okay because, even though Fantilli isn't technically at center and Laine is, they're all kind of the same thing as far as having no positions, and the center's just there to take faceoffs anyway. Fantilli can still play like a center, be the defensively responsible one, or be in the middle in the offensive zone, just not taking as many faceoffs. Which, I do want the forwards on the youngest team in the league to know what they're supposed to do when they get out on the ice as far as where they're supposed to go and what they're supposed to be. And maybe they do. Perhaps that's something Pascal Vincent has taken into account. This might build some chemistry as guys on the ice get used to each other's tendencies if they're kept on the same line for an extended period of time. Maybe that positionless kind of thing does help each player roam and the other players on the ice with them to kind of react and then learn what each other's tendencies are, so they can just kind of know where each other's going to be at all times. But if it doesn't really make a difference who plays center, then what would be the harm in putting Fantilli back in his natural position and back where you ultimately want him to end up being? The Jackets did not draft Adam Fantilli for him to be a top-line left winger. They drafted him to be the top-line center of this team in both the long-term and probably the short-term, too. I would not be surprised if Adam Fantilli is the top-line center by the end of the season, or right now he could definitely be the second-line center, in my opinion. But, again, like we don't see Chicago messing around with what Connor Bedard is. They're putting him at the top-line center, and they're letting him take his lumps. And because Chicago knows they're not trying to compete for a playoff spot or anything, the Jackets they're trying to feign like they're going to be competitive. Again, throughout the first 3 games, there's been 2 abysmal ones. They're definitely going to have to look a bit better throughout in the next 10 games or so if you really want to convince me that they have a good shot of making the playoffs. And I'm not saying that Fantilli is supposed to be used exactly like Connor Bedard is in Chicago. Obviously, Columbus and the Blackhawks are in 2 very different situations. But I do want Adam Fantilli to get used to playing center and not like semi-center, whatever the positionless version is, like actual center at an NHL level, taking a lot of face-offs. And I would prefer him to get used to that kind of stuff fairly early. I know that you do want to make sure you're protecting your prospect, make sure you're protecting the guy that you don't want to kill his confidence or anything, but Adam Fantilli does seem like he has shown a lot of maturity for being as young of a prospect as he is, and he played center in game 1, as I believe he was on the third line center for that game, and honestly, he looked pretty fine there. He got his primary assist there in the first game. He hasn't gotten a point in the last 2, although again, he's looked fine. He just had the points haven't gotten there on the board. But yeah, I would just prefer to see Fantilli at center, no matter which line it is. If you don't want Fantilli as your top line center right now because you're trying to ease him into things, then put him in the second line, maybe even the third line. But I would just rather prefer to see Adam Fantilli at the center position. Again, not a huge deal right now as it's still very early in the season. But if we're getting into like 20 games in and we're still seeing this thing where, we have to put Line A at center, but we have to play Fantilli with Line A, so Fantilli has to go on the wing, I feel like that's a bit silly, especially if they're sitting at 500 or below, and it's becoming clearer and clearer that the Jackets just aren't really going to make that push for a playoff spot that the front office was perhaps really looking for. If that's the case, then just put Fantilli at center, make sure his development is going well, and let the rest of the chips can fall into place. I'm sure there'll be others like I'm going to talk about, but if we're talking about Fantilli, I just want him to play as much center as possible, as early as possible, so that when he is a little bit older and when some of their other prospects get up and hopefully the roster is in a bit of a better condition to actually compete for not just a playoff spot, but to try to make a run in the playoffs, that Fantilli definitely has Fantilli has a lot of experience at center in order to really push him to being that top line center. So that's going to do it for this video. I rambled on way too long in this one. I did not anticipate going for over 11 minutes, but thank you for watching. If you did make it this far into it, you probably have the patience of a saint. So I appreciate that. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. I'll see you at the next one.